Hello and welcome to the first session of Karen's Colours for 2026. This is going to be one of those monthly colour forecasts, but before embarking on a reading for January 2026, I'd like to remind us all that this is a traditional time to review the past year before setting out our goals and resolutions for the upcoming year. If you've already done those resolutions, then maybe you might like to consider them in the light of what I present today. We're going to be examining the progress made, the setbacks encountered, the challenges that we've overcome, and the work that has been left undone. But before we begin, thank you once again for attending this session. I know that there are not many of you that do so, but I'm certainly hoping that those of you who do will get something positive out of these readings. The reading itself is going to be rather truncated because I'll spend most of the time looking at 2025 in review. We're going to be examining the colours of the main skills and experiences that you've had, the colours of the primary blockages or deficits that have afflicted you throughout the year. And the review will encourage you to think where you're going to go next. There'll be creation of New Year's resolutions that are involved, but those, of course, are very personal to you. And of course, because we make New Year's resolutions, there are lots of goals to be set, lots of ideas about where we want to go next. There is an importance in reviewing past experience so that we can create a future path. And that future path will be denoted by one colour card for January 26. And I'm going to also give you an oracle card to help guide the way. But otherwise, the reading will be extremely truncated. Certainly, enjoy. So, moving on now to people born in the month of February. How did your 2025 carry out for you? If we have a look at the beginning of February of 2025, which is when I began these readings, you were completely involved in hard work and duty. And this can be seen in the amount of brown and blue that was involved in your month. By March, that hard work and duty had become a little bit of a struggle, and you were feeling vulnerable because you hadn't actually completed all of the tasks that you had required of yourself. By April, that vulnerability had turned to neediness, and what's more, you were somewhat confused because there were right things to do and there were wrong things to do, only it was very difficult to separate the two out. You were strung between two extremes, and that was denoted by pink, black, and white being the predominant colours. By May, nurture and mental overload had become the features of that month. Now you were stressed to the max, but also possibly happy, because the blue that also predominates tends to suggest that things were going along fairly peacefully for you. Nevertheless, that mental overload was causing you a fair degree of anxiety as well. And that continued through into June, because now, instead of everything just simply going quietly for you, you had instead a lot of hard work ahead of you. And that was denoted by the preponderance of brown. By July, there was a mixture of all sorts of things happening. You were multi-directional, multifaceted, issues were coming from all directions. But by August, these had consolidated back into you taking advantage of opportunities that were offered to you, even though they involved more work. They also allowed you to create some fairly solid ambitions, and that was denoted by the green and the brown. By September, the green had disappeared and brown was still there, so your ambitions were still in vogue. But now there was secret indecision. Will you take on the particular role you wanted to, or will you not? Black and grey caused you to keep yourself to yourself, at the same time needing to make decisions that you really didn't understand. By October, the black had disappeared, the work had disappeared, And instead, green had re-emerged, and you were once again being offered opportunities. But this time, you were taking the road towards those opportunities with a great deal of caution, as denoted by the use of a large amount of grey once again. In November, that confusion continued, and this time it was accompanied by a profusion of black and white. So you're back to being cast between two extremes. Will I do this? Will I do that? Which is the most appealing? Which is the least likely to cause trouble for you? But in December, this had all consolidated down to a total withdrawal to reconsider your options. February people really had a bit of a hard time in the second half of 2025. So looking at the year overall, we find that brown was the most common colour. It appeared 12 times, and it was about goals and practical skills and being grounded. Grey, which appeared 11 times, was all about insecurity, confusion, and imbalance. So even though you appeared to be grounded mentally, you probably didn't feel that way. And the third colour, pink, appeared 10 times, which was all about surrender, vulnerability, and love. Were you able to just simply allow things to be? So let's now have a look at the things that were impeding your progress. In February, you had a number of colours that started you off. By March, that had consolidated down into black, white, red, yellow, and cyan. So there was still a lot of things that you were trying to avoid. By April, all except the red and yellow had receded a little. And as a result, you were still fairly stressed about the actions that you needed to take. By May, we were back to that same scenario of black, white, red, yellow, and cyan as the predominant colours. And by June, that had coalesced into black and cyan. July gave you cyan, as did August, as did September, as did October. And it also continued on into November, but this time accompanied by a rise of yellow once again. So there were stresses and the opportunities for peace and quiet that were eluding you. By December, white and red included themselves into that category. So now there was the unknown, there was shock, there was action that needed to be taken, there were things you needed to think about and remember, and there were things that you needed to overcome. Were you in fact doing all of those things? So when we look at what is available to you through those colours, white was all about curiosity, enlightenment, but also being overwhelmed by experience. The red showed there was a great deal of passion and frustration, but impulsiveness and recklessness was something you were trying very hard to avoid. The yellow denoted excitement, learning, anxiety, and happiness. All of those tended to recede into the background as something that you didn't feel you could cope with very well. And finally, cyan, which had predominated for most of the months throughout the year, was all about understanding peace, but also stagnation and boredom. And that was one thing you desperately wanted to avoid. So how does that lead to the end of the year? Well, altogether, the ambition to lead yourself out of uncertainty and perceived vulnerability tended to collapse because there was an inability to deal with the unexpected, with recklessness, with anxiety, and with boredom. So your life tended not to give you what you wanted throughout 2025. So let's now look at what it is that you might have as guidelines for 2026. The oracle cards that I've chosen to help us along here are James Van Praag's The Soul's Journey. And these are cards that involve a short meditation that you can practice as you enter into January 2026. But let's begin with a color card. The card that will tell us what it is that likely to create challenges for you during 2026, and particularly in January. And the card that we have here is orange over white. There are things that are going to impinge upon your unconscious mind. You need to lighten up. That's what the white internally is telling you. But when you lighten up, you don't necessarily have to regard that as being a crisis in the real world. You can face the world with courage, with confidence, and with the ability to show what you are made of. That's what this color combination is asking you to do. Be confident in the face of the unknown. Let's have a look at what the oracle might tell us. And what we have here is purpose. Try this saying for a while. Purpose. I know what I am here to do. Have confidence. This card fits very nicely with the orange on white. Be confident in the face of the unknown, because you know what you are here to do. It's a good combination. Well, I hope you've received something positive out of that annual review and have taken on board the small color reading and affirmation as a guide towards 2026. Certainly, looking at these readings from an annual perspective, a retrospective, I've come across a number of insights, both for myself, but also on behalf of those people that I know that have birthdays in the various months that I have been reading for. And one of the things that's come up here is whether or not I would even bother to continue with these. I feel hopeful that I should. I also feel as though I need to make some alterations. If you can think of suggestions that might make these more user-friendly, if you've been following the readings at all, you might even find that there's something in them that you might like to comment about. And I'd really appreciate those comments, because right now I'm in a dilemma, which is why I haven't actually done a full reading for every month, for every birthday month for January. It all depends on the results of this reading as to whether or not I continue. I have a lot to contemplate. My black is quite prominent too. Anyway, if you're new here and you haven't actually seen these before, you might think they're a bit confusing. That's part and parcel of the color reading. It's something that most people will never have experienced. So I wish you all the best for 2026, and hopefully we'll meet again for more color readings. If not, plenty of other things I can talk about that have to do with color. Until next time, bye.